Welcome to another episode of the Legal Lowdown. I'm your host, Matthew R. Carpenter, an attorney, and today we're looking at a law review article titled The Judicial Demand for Explainable Artificial Intelligence by Ashley Deeks. Ms. Deeks, thank you for your article. So let's dive in. Oh, I'm about to dive in. Splash. No, I'm just okay. Okay, seriously. Okay, all right. Well, think about let's start out here by thinking about your everyday life, or maybe, the decisions being made about your community. Increasingly powerful AI algorithms are kind of behind the scenes doing a lot of this work, right? Making important calls. So today we're talking about things like who gets approved for what, maybe even decisions in the justice system like bail or sentencing, big stuff, like huge stuff. But here's the thing, a lot of the time we have no idea how these algorithms actually get to their conclusions, right? Like you put info in, you get a decision out. But everything in the middle, is gone, right? It's a total black box, kind of like the courts in a way, right? Like you submit documents, you get a document back, but you don't really know what went into that process, right? Sure, somebody typed it up and cited some sources, but you don't really get insight into that, right? And so it's really fascinating because this isn't just, when it comes to AI, some tech nerd problem anymore, right? Judges, right, in actual courtrooms are bumping up against this, and the lack of transparency is causing problems. You can see how it'd be an issue, especially in the legal world, on the understanding, the reasoning, the why behind a decision that's being made. Like all those things are crucial, but AI doesn't always provide it. And fairness, right? Transparency, understanding, these are all fundamental due process concerns. So understanding why you're receiving a sentence of 10 years as opposed to 5 is a pretty big deal in our constitutional system. And it provides something more than transparency, it provides accountability. Right? And that black box approach just doesn't fly when people's rights are actually on the line. Okay, so justice isn't supposed to be a mystery novel, guys. It's just not. And the source material says that the judges are starting to demand explanations for AI decisions, thank God. And this is pushing something called Explainable AI, or XAI. So I'm going to dive into what XAI actually means here, why the courts are uniquely positioned to push for it, and look at how they're doing that actually in administrative law settings and criminal law settings as well. Those seem like some key areas based on the source material. So stepping back for a second, what exactly is XAI? What are we even talking about, right? Well, at its core, XAI is really about making these AI systems understandable to us humans. But that's pretty vague. You're probably asking how, right? Maybe by seeing the code? No, you're not going to be looking at code. Nobody understands code. No, most attorneys don't understand code. It's more about finding ways to shed light on the process, right? How did the algorithm get from the input to a specific output or a prediction? Interpretability. Interpretability is going to be huge in this space, and the payoff is a pretty big deal too, because it helps build trust. It lets us identify and hopefully fix biases or errors hidden inside these systems. And you'd be surprised at how many biases exist, given that these AI systems are oftentimes trained on real-world human correspondence, which we know is riddled by bias, right? So finding the flaws and, it just generally improves our understanding of what these powerful tools are doing. And obviously, we want to make them better. Now, I mentioned the black box. Trying to open that up isn't always simple, particularly in a legal setting where money is on the line, because sometimes making a AI more explainable might slightly decrease its raw accuracy, for example. And developers, they worry about giving away trade secrets, like their special sauce. So you have accuracy versus explanation, or keeping trade secrets versus transparency, right? These are all things that have to be weighed. And it's a really big part of the debate right now. I mean, companies naturally want to protect their intellectual property, right? Like their IP. It makes business sense. But when an algorithm is making decisions that profoundly impact people's lives, their liberty, their benefits, the courts are increasingly asking or saying, wait a minute. Does trade secrecy really get to trump basic fairness and the need to understand? That makes total sense to ask those questions. I'm glad we are asking those questions. So how are judges who aren't necessarily AI coding experts, Python experts, JavaScript, all that, how are they getting involved in pushing back on this black box? Well, Judges, according to the source material, that is, see AI not in a lab, but in real messy cases, like, of course, right? Like real cases, like medical malpractice cases, criminal sentences, administrative cases, right? And they see the direct impact on people. And the argument the source makes is that courts are maybe, and surprisingly, really well situated to shape what explainable AI actually means in practice. They can use the common law approach in deciding specific issues based on the specific facts of the case before them. So on a case-by-case basis, kind of peeling back these layers. They're building the rules organically from the ground up based on actual problems they encounter, right? Not like politicians who try to write some comprehensive, broad sweeping law like the European Union AI Act, which I'm not, throwing digs at, but, you have these broad sweeping laws, and they might not fully get to the real issues that you're encountering on a day-to-day basis. And so courts also can tailor the kind of explanation that they demand in each one of these cases, right? Like what a big company needs to understand a contract dispute is probably very different from what a criminal defendant needs to know about their scores or their computations, right, when it comes to their criminal sentence report. So it's totally different needs. And so that flexibility actually pushes developers to create different types of XAI tools. And importantly, it keeps a public institution like the courts involved in steering AI, right? Not just leaving it all to the tech companies, which is a pretty big deal. We definitely need some regulations in this space. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. So let's get specific then. Where are we actually seeing judges flex this case-by-case common law AI muscle, XAI muscle? Well, you can see it with government agencies and administrative law. You've got agencies using AI, sometimes machine learning for all sorts of things, maybe sorting through thousands of public comments on a new rule. AI can be used in parsing through those public comments, drawing out the main themes. If you have something like the EPA, you could also use AI to predict environmental impacts of a project, and courts are required at times to review agency decisions under laws like the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA. These APA agencies have to explain themselves. They need to give satisfactory reasons for their decisions or their actions sometimes. And the problem is if the agency's reason is basically just, well, the algorithm said so that's what I did, that's probably not going to cut it under the APA. So the judges reviewing these decisions are saying, hold up, show your work. Like pretty much an opaque algorithm makes the judicial review really, really hard. So we're going to push back for XAI, explainable AI. And again, the type of explainability or interpretability, might differ. So maybe for a big rule that affects everyone, they want a model-centric explanation. Like how does the algorithm generally work, right? But for a decision about one specific person's benefits, maybe Social Security benefits, they might want a subject-centric review. So I guess the question becomes, how does the AI analyze this person's specific situation? And the stakes get even higher, I imagine, when we shift to the criminal sentencing world where we're talking about someone's freedom. Like this is where it gets incredibly personal because predictive algorithms are being used sometimes to controversially assess the risk of someone like reoffending, right? Like computers are now deciding your literal fate. Like if you're a family member who's incarcerated, their fate could be decided by algorithm, right? That people don't even understand how it's working because like with these algorithms, when they learn, part of that learning process is that they refine their own code and their own parameters so that they can become more efficient. And the crazy part is that the developers don't even always know how these programs are refining their own code, right? Or coming to these conclusions. So the developers don't even know what's going on. So the court definitely is not going to know what's going on, right? And, judges might look at these, let's say like reoffending scores or the likelihood that someone's going to reoffend because there are scores that are tallied up, your pre-sentence report and all different types of reports that come out during criminal prosecution proceedings. These scores could be used to decide like bail or the length of a sentence, right? Take the COMPAS tool, which is like well known, the Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions tool, right? Like this compass tool was actually challenged in a Wisconsin Supreme Court case called State versus Loomis. Right. And that case is key here because, like, in that case, the defendant, Mr. Loomis, challenged the use of his compass score in sentencing because its workings were secret. He couldn't really examine how he got that score, which was deciding his fate. And so you might be asking, well, did the Supreme Court of Wisconsin ban it? No, they didn't, actually. Um, they didn't ban the use of the score, but they did acknowledge its limitations. I'm sure that was not enough for Mr. Loomis. And they said, okay, you can use the compass score state, but judges need to be warned about its limits, and these scores can't be the sole factor. Right. So you're probably going to be seeing some boilerplate thrown into these sentencing decisions by these judges. And the reports, and this is also what the Lewis court said, the reports need warnings going forward. So basically putting a big warning label on there saying judges understand what this is and isn't exactly. And this really highlights to me, why XAI is so needed here, right? Judges have legal duties to justify sentences based on specific factors they need to avoid and specific factors they need to consider. And just blindly trusting a machine, which we call automation bias, which is just deferring to a machine, you can't do that, right? Because then you may be violating your standards as a judge, right? As a sentencing judge. And, instead, courts need a meaningful way to understand, right? Like how the risk score was actually calculated for a criminal defendant. And so the defendant, if anything, can challenge the score if something's wrong. And so that leads us to another question, right? Like, how can someone challenge an algorithm's processes without actually looking at the code and breaking it down and all that? Counterfactuals are actually really interesting. It's basically a way of asking, what if a piece of information that went into the algorithm was different, right? Because basically what it lets us do is assess the value that the algorithm gave to a certain data point. So if you said something like, what if my age was different? Or what if I completed this rehabilitation program, right? Would that drastically change my score? It helps the defendant, in theory, pinpoint what drove the score, and it gives them concrete things to potentially argue about or provide for context, which could make their challenge more meaningful. So pulling all this together, courts stepping in, demanding these explanations. What does this mean for AI, actually? And how it gets developed and used in the real world? Well, I think it means, if anything, the courts, piece by piece, case by case, laboriously so, are actively shaping what explainable and fair means in the AI context. And they're setting precedents, right? They're forcing the conversation about transparency, sometimes even pushing back on the trade secret arguments when fundamental fairness is at stake. Thank God. So it's not just, regulators making rules from the top down. This common law approach evolving through actual disputes, it complements those other efforts like the GDPR in Europe or the rules in France we sometimes hear about. But the courts are still dealing with real harms and real rights that are and they're uniquely positioned to make sure AI development aligns with our core legal values. Like, that's why the courts are here, right? To uphold the Constitution, to keep us safe. So they're supposed to do. And so fairness, accountability, finding and addressing biases. Please, God, find and address those biases. It does feel like the courts are one decision at a time, I would say, building this new law for XAI, kind of steering this incredibly powerful technology towards being more transparent, more accountable, right? Which I think leads to a really important question for you all to chew on. Get your beak wet on this, right? Can this process, this relatively slow, deliberate, case-by-case common law approach, which we have been dealing with forever, can it actually keep pace with how incredibly fast XAI technology itself is evolving? Now, that's a good question. Personally, I don't think that it can. And what makes the approach, the best way? What makes any approach like the best approach, right? The most robust way to make sure this powerful tool ultimately serves justice and doesn't, run away from us and terminate us, right? That's definitely something that everybody should be thinking about because AI is going to impact us all. And it will change everything that we do, right? So serious problems, serious considerations. All right. that wraps up this episode. Thank you for listening. And keep tuning in to the Legal Lowdown.